one of the things about finding nearby nature, right, is if I go to see a psychologist in their office, I can only go, and I find their office to be a really safe place where I feel really comforted, I feel really held, I feel very regulated. I can only go there when I have a session. So that session has to be booked. If we take a client to a nearby creek or a safe tree to sit under that they can access anytime, that can become the therapy office, even if we're not there. So what I would say is really considering how um, how we can find nearby pockets of nature to introduce our clients to. There's a lot of people who bring trees and like plants and trees into their office. I'd say that's a great idea. It makes people feel comfortable. I'm someone who doesn't have a heap of clutter, even though I have this stupid Yoda behind me. But I think, yeah, I think that it's a lot about making experiences where people feel held and comfortable. So in a busy city, super tricky. So there's probably no easy answer to that at all. But I think this segues into prerequisites for taking clients outdoors. And I'm not going to talk about what qualifications to get because that's so country specific, or how to tie knots the right way. Make sure you're a competent outdoor guide. The next thing is make sure the adventures you're going to go on, that you've practiced them with other people. And I'd say don't practice with therapists. They're too nice. Pick people who don't give a crap about psychotherapy outdoors and take them. If you're going to go rock climbing, go climbing with them and ask them for their feedback about how you were perceived outdoors. Don't do another good example. Reflect on how you feel your relationship to the environment of where you're going. So for instance, I love scuba diving. I've done it a few times in my life. I think it's an amazing experience. I think a wicked way to get clients to focus on their breathing, feel snorkeling the same. That said, I'm a super anxious scuba diver. And so what that means is I waste oxygen by breathing too fast and having too elevated of a heart rate. So if we have 45 minutes of oxygen, I've wasted it in 30 minutes. I've ruined everyone's time because of my anxiety. And I'll get out of the water and be like, that was freaking amazing. And everyone's like, Will, you're a jerk. Like, calm down, you know? So I should not lead scuba diving trips, right? So reflect on your relationship to the activity you're doing and your ability to do it. I feel comfortable as far from the world as possible, where someone else might be anxious. How do we get to the hospital fast enough? I feel that has never been a fear. Like, obviously you have a risk assessment plan, but being remote with, help is an hour away. I love it. It's what I do. Same as Colin, I've had many experiences being on the water, canoeing. Some people don't like that. I have no problem being on the water. So considering so I think it's important that you know your relationship to where you're going so that you are at your best regulated self while facilitating those experiences.
Question I had just on that note, in terms of what would you say to somebody who acknowledges they have 30 minutes of oxygen to have a good time? Would you, if they were interested, would you encourage them to say, hey, just do a 30-minute session? Because then with 45 minutes worth of oxygen, in that sense, would they be willing, or would you be interested in having them adjust or validate that, yeah, that's a good way to do it if this is how you want to engage with clients? Just know your limits in that sense, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a good example. I was thinking about the anxiety angle, but it's a good example that if you know your limitations, we wouldn't take a client to rock climb something we could not rock climb. So we also want our client to be successful at whatever they do. So they don't want to come to therapy and feel like a failure, right? So if we are doing something that we might not be feeling comfortable at facilitating, they're going to be like, I do not look up to this person at all. So what I might do is say, yeah, we've got Joe Schmo, the scuba diving guide, and we're just going to go for a quick 30-minute dive. And if I'm feeling super regulated, I'll probably make it the 45 minutes, right? So those are things to consider. For instance, I went snorkeling with a friend just last weekend, and it's freshwater pond. It's insanely beautiful, right? And we jump in the water. My friend's not the most confident swimmer, and I was like, well, we're just messing around. Like, this is a 45-minute snorkel. We've got wetsuits on. You're gonna float, like, and it's got little streams. You can get out of this thing whenever you want. And he jumped in the water with a snorkel thing, and he's like, just give me a second to get my breathing right. And I was like, what are you talking? Like, I was so invalidating of his experience because I'm very comfortable snorkeling. And so we have to keep remembering, we have to keep asking ourselves, whose adventure is it? And if our mind is off focusing on ourselves feeling good about the adventure, we're leaving our client behind. And we can do that with our friends. It's happened to me before. I've looked down rock climbing with friends, and one person's on their phone belaying me. And I've gone, dude, I'm not a comfortable, Kyle's climbed with me. I'm not a comfortable climber. I love doing it, but that's why I don't facilitate a ton of climbing trips. I'm the guy who sits at the bottom while the climbing guide does all the work. And then I get to talk with the client about what it was like to climb. So it's very funny you have to reflect on how we feel about these experiences. One of the dangers of outdoor guiding is, and I'm going to make a big generalization here, is outdoor guiding can become about how badass you are and about, I've done this, I've done that. And while I've open boat canoed a class 4 river before, that's pretty hardcore and pretty horrifying. I would never think that is relevant to anything my client cares about. So what can happen is we can go mountain biking, and if I'm a good mountain biker and my client's very slow, I'm then getting frustrated at my clients for how slow they are. I'm frustrated with how bad they are at canoeing or how bad the other staff are at canoeing. So when that happens, we forget whose adventure it is. And so we need to keep remembering it's the client's adventure in the outdoors and not ours. So I see that but the thing is, it's not just an adventure problem, because what can also happen is if you're super into a certain type of therapy and you think that type of therapy is so good, you will judge the other people who don't do it. I cannot believe that they don't understand how good this is. And then you'll go, it won't be your client's. If your client gets better, it's because you have the privileged knowledge of the best therapy. If your client gets worse or drops out, we will be at risk of blaming the client. So the client wasn't ready. They were resistant. They were in denial. This is how gross men talk about women when they're at the bar and they're drunk. I tried to pick up this girl, but she's not ready for how great I am. What happened? So we have to remember it's our client's experience, which is why we have to start everything with a culture in our organizations that our client's voice actually matters. And this is really important in trauma. Where does trauma come from? You have removed someone's ability to choose. You've taken away their power. And so if we're working in a trauma-informed way in the outdoors, and we are so risk averse, we take away their power, guess what we're doing? We are redoing everything that's the reason they've come to see us. And so, Kyle, one thing I said before you joined in, and I did a lecture with Michigan State University about this the other day, is being risk averse is fine. We don't want clients to get hurt. When we're risk averse because we don't want our agency to get in trouble, or we don't want to be the inept worker, but we still want to do scuba diving, if we control their whole experience, holding it so tight because we're so risk averse, we shouldn't take them scuba diving. Don't go outside if you need to control their experience of being outside. And my good friend Graham Pringle, who is the complex trauma guru of adventure therapy in Australia, he always says the opposite of trauma, if everything's been unpredictable, if a child's life has been unpredictable, they haven't had predictable caregivers, and they haven't had chances where they can choose what to do, we need to give them the experience to choose as much as possible, as much as they can. What time should we have dinner? Think about all these things if you're on a camping trip that we choose. We're going to go climbing on Tuesday. Well, have you thought about what it's like for someone who's a victim of some sort of sexual assault to put a rock climbing harness on, which is all up in your privates? Have you thought about prepping them for what this is going to feel like? How much prep work have you done to let them choose that this is important for them? All these different things about choice. So I think that's kind of an interesting way of reflecting on how what you bring to the session is a lot about how comfortable you are, how regulated you can be, because we know if we're unregulated, anxiety is communicated nonverbally. And even if you're like, oh, I'm a little bit anxious right now, your client is likely to start feeling that unconsciously.